What if the Bible had never been written? Have you ever stopped to think what the world would be like if the Bible simply didn't exist? I'm not talking about faith or religion. I'm talking about the physical book, the object. What if the texts had never been compiled, preserved, translated? What if everything had been lost in the sands of time, in wars, in the bonfires of history? What would remain of civilization as you know it? The answer will leave you speechless. Because it's not just about religion, it's about art, science, laws, morals, even the language you speak right now. Without the Bible, the West as you know it would be unrecognizable. Perhaps it wouldn't even exist. And the most disturbing thing? You probably wouldn't be watching this video right now, nor would I be here to tell this story. Let me show you the chaos that would ensue and why that should scare you. Welcome to another episode of History Would Be Different If, the channel where we take the pillars of civilization and tear them down all at once just to watch the whole world collapse like dominoes. Today, we're not just going to change one character, we're going to erase an entire book, the most influential book in human history, and you'll see that without it, absolutely everything changes. Let's start with the obvious, religion. Without the written Bible, Christianity as we know it doesn't exist. It's that simple. Jesus' teachings transmitted orally, and you know what happens with oral histories, right? They change, they get distorted. Each community creates its own version. In 50 years, you'd have 100 different versions of the Sermon on the Mount. In 200 years, nobody would really know what Jesus said anymore. Christianity would become a patchwork of local traditions, superstitions, and fabrications. It probably wouldn't even be called Christianity anymore. And then you think, but other religions survived without sacred texts. They did survive, yes, but they didn't dominate the world, because it was precisely the ability to write, copy, and spread the Bible that transformed a marginal Jewish sect into a global force. Without a fixed, unified, authoritative text, Christianity becomes just another mystery religion of the Roman Empire, popular for a time, forgotten afterward. But wait, it gets darker, because without organized Christianity, Europe never became culturally unified. There was no Catholic Church to preserve classical knowledge during the Middle Ages. You know those monks who copied Greek and Roman manuscripts by hand. They don't exist. The works of Aristotle, Plato, the medical texts of Galen, lost forever. The Renaissance? It never happened because there were no ancient texts to reborn. Europe remained trapped in an eternal cycle of tribalism, local wars, and fragmented knowledge. And it doesn't stop there. Think about science. The scientific revolution was born in a Christian cradle, not by chance. The idea that the universe has rational laws which can be understood by human reason comes directly from Judeo-Christian theology. A rational God creates a rational universe. Without this philosophical foundation, perhaps modern science would never have taken off. Galileo, Newton, Kepler, all deeply Christian, all motivated by the belief that studying nature was studying the work of God. Without the Bible, without this worldview, would we have telescopes, antibiotics, modern physics? And what about art? Forget it. Without the Bible, you lose Michelangelo, Da Vinci, Caravaggio. The Sistine Chapel would be an empty room. The Pietà wouldn't exist. Bach wouldn't compose his Passions. Handel wouldn't write Messiah. Dante wouldn't create the Divine Comedy. Dostoevsky wouldn't write the Brothers Karamazov. Half of humanity's artistic and literary heritage simply vanishes. Because these works weren't born in a vacuum. They are direct dialogues with the biblical text. And there's more. Think about your daily life. Western laws, based on Judeo-Christian principles. The idea of universal human dignity, it comes from created in the image of God. Human rights, they have deep theological roots. Without the Bible shaping Western thought, perhaps we would still live under rigid caste systems where your value as a person would depend on your lineage, not your humanity. The abolition of slavery in the 18th and 19th centuries, led by Christians who used the Bible as a moral weapon. Without this text, without this ethical foundation, how much longer would slavery have lasted? Even the language you speak would change. Modern Portuguese was shaped by biblical translations. English, the King James Bible literally created expressions you use every day without knowing it. The salt of the earth, wash your hands, an eye for an eye. Without the Bible, these phrases wouldn't exist, and hundreds of others wouldn't either. If you're realizing this hole is deeper than it seemed, subscribe to the channel because we're not even close to the end yet. Now let's go deeper, because what I've shown you so far is only the surface. The real catastrophe isn't in what disappears, it's in what emerges in its place. Because human nature abhors a vacuum, and when you remove the text that unified half the planet for 2,000 years, other things occupy that space, and they aren't always beautiful things. Without the written Bible, European paganism never truly died. It transformed, adapted, but remained alive. You would have a continent fragmented into hundreds of local cults, each village with its own gods, its own rituals, its own truths. Sounds romantic? Perhaps, until you remember that many of these cults included human sacrifices. The Celts had the Wicker Man. The Norse offered slaves to the gods. The Romans had gladiators die as a religious spectacle. And without a unifying moral force to say, this is wrong, without a text declaring the sacredness of human life, how long would these practices continue? And then you might think, but Greek philosophy also valued life. Did it? The same Greece that practiced infanticide of defective babies? The same Rome that abandoned unwanted children to die of hunger? It was Christianity, with its texts on the value of each soul, that changed that. Without the Bible preserving and spreading this message, how many generations would still see newborns as disposable? But wait, because things get even more interesting. Let's talk about power. Without the Bible, without organized Christianity, who fills the vacuum of moral authority in Europe? Probably the state. Always the state. And states without religious counterweights tend to, well, you know. Without the medieval church, with all its flaws, standing up to kings, reminding them that they are accountable to something greater than themselves, you would have emperors with absolute power, without any moral or institutional restraint. Pure tyranny. Because the idea that even kings are under a higher law, under divine judgment, this idea comes directly from the Bible. Render unto Caesar the things that are Caesar's, and unto God the things that are God's. Without this distinction between temporal power and spiritual authority, you have no limits, only brute force. And consider the geopolitical impact. Without Christianity unifying Europe, the continent never develops a common identity. There is no Christendom. There is no exchange of ideas between England, France, Germany, Italy. Each region remains isolated, tribal, xenophobic. The medieval universities, creations of the church, do not exist. Oxford, Paris, Bologna are never founded. And without universities, without this melting pot of intellectual debate, knowledge does not accumulate, it does not expand. Each generation starts almost from scratch. Human progress slows down to a painful crawl. Now comes the part that will give you chills. We're going to talk about identity. Because the Bible didn't just shape institutions and laws, it shaped how you think about yourself. The idea that you have intrinsic value, independent of your usefulness to society. It comes from the image and likeness of God. The idea that you can change, redeem yourself, start over. It comes from the biblical narratives of transformation. Paul, Peter, David. Without these texts circulating, without these stories shaping the collective unconscious, you grow up in a culture where your value is purely functional. You are worth what you produce. If you don't produce, you are worth nothing. Zero compassion for the weak, the sick, the elderly. Social Darwinism before Darwin existed. And there's a detail that nobody notices: literacy. The Protestant Reformation exploded the literacy rate in Europe. Why? Because Luther wanted every person to be able to read the Bible. Without the Bible, without this religious incentive to educate the masses, how much longer would knowledge remain restricted to a tiny elite? Without printing presses popularizing sacred texts, perhaps Gutenberg's revolution wouldn't even happen. And without printing presses, without the rapid dissemination of ideas, the scientific revolution is delayed. The Enlightenment doesn't happen.
Modern democracy, which depends on informed citizens, may never emerge. You remain trapped in a world of illiterates governed by an aristocracy that controls all knowledge. And look at the cruel irony. Many modern critics of the Bible can only criticize it because they live in a society shaped by it. The freedom of expression that allows you to question sacred texts, it has roots in Protestant theological debates. The notion of individual conscience above authority, it comes straight from the Reformation. Even modern atheism is, in a way, a rebellious child of Christianity. It presupposes values, human dignity, justice, compassion, that were forged in centuries of Judeo-Christian culture. Take the Bible out of the picture, and you might not even have the conceptual tools to criticize it. You live in a completely different moral universe where these questions don't even make sense. If this is messing with your head, leave a like, because there's a deeper layer to this story.
Now we arrive at the point where the alternate reality becomes a fascinating nightmare. Because up to this point, we've talked about the West. But what about the rest of the world? What if the Bible had never been written? What would have happened to Africa, Asia, the Americas? The answer is as disturbing as it is unexpected. They probably would never have been discovered, not in the way they were. Think about it. The great European voyages of the 15th and 16th centuries were not purely commercial ventures. They were religious missions disguised as exploration. Catholic monarchs financed these insane expeditions because they wanted to spread the gospel. Without the Bible, without the mission to take the word of God to the ends of the earth, why on earth would anyone invest fortunes in ships to cross unknown oceans? Economic incentive alone wasn't enough. It was too risky, too expensive, too deadly. But add religious fervor? Then the equation balances. Columbus didn't sail just for gold. He believed he was fulfilling biblical prophecy. Without that motivation, he would have stayed home. America remained isolated for centuries more. Or worse, when it was finally discovered, it was by even more brutal empires, without even the veneer of Christian moral justification, that at least attempted to limit the excesses, and those excesses were monstrous even with that restraint. And here's where it gets bizarre. Without Christianity, without the theological debate about whether indigenous people have souls, about whether slavery is moral, about whether colonized people are human beings with rights, perhaps there is no debate at all. Just pure conquest, without guilt, without questioning. Because ironically, it was Christian theologians using the Bible who began to question colonialism. Bartolomé de las Casas defended indigenous people by citing sacred texts. Jesuit missionaries documented native languages and cultures because they saw divine value in those people. Take away the Bible, take away that moral basis that at least some used to defend the oppressed, and you have genocide without any remorse. No dissenting voice, no historical record, because nobody thinks it's worthwhile to document the extinction of soulless barbarians. But let's turn the tables. What if, without the Bible, without Christianity unifying Europe, other empires dominated the world? What if Islam, which, yes, it has its own holy book, filled the entire vacuum left behind? Or the Mongol Empire, which in the 13th century almost conquered the known world? Without a united Christian Europe to resist, the Mongols might have swept across the entire continent. And then you live in a world where the Pax Mongolica is permanent, where Genghis Khan is the ancestor of every reigning dynasty, where history is written in Mongolian, not Latin, where Buddha or Tengri are the dominant gods, not Jehovah. Is it better? Is it worse? Nobody knows, but it's radically different. And you, a child of this alternative world, wouldn't even be able to conceive of the reality we are living in now. And there's another disturbing angle. Without the Bible, the very idea of linear history might not exist, because the Judeo-Christian view of time, with a beginning, middle, and end, creation and apocalypse, progress toward a goal, shaped how the West understands history. Other cultures see time as cyclical, an eternal return. Nothing really changes. Without the biblical text influencing philosophers and historians, perhaps we would never develop the notion of progress.
And without the idea that history is going somewhere, why strive to improve? Why fight injustices if everything is an eternal cycle? Without this linear worldview, without this eschatological hope embedded in the culture, social revolutions, abolition, women's suffrage, civil rights might never gain strength, because why bother? Everything returns to what it was before. It always has been this way. It always will be. Now, pay attention to this macabre detail. Without the Bible preserving the history of the Jewish people, what happens to the Jews? Because the Tanakh, the Old Testament, is the historical record that kept Jewish identity alive through millennia of diaspora. Without it written, without this unifying text, the Jews scattered throughout the ancient world would likely assimilate completely into local cultures. In 3 or 4 generations, they would disappear. Identity would be diluted. And then you lose not only a religion, but one of the most influential cultures in human history. You lose Einstein, Freud, Marx, Mahler, Kafka. You lose incalculable scientific, artistic, and philosophical contributions because these people existed in a cultural continuity that was only possible because of a text preserved with religious obsession for 3,000 years. Let's talk about the elephant in the room, sexual morality. The sexual revolution of the 20th century was in large part a rebellion against Judeo-Christian sexual morality. But what if that morality had never existed? What if you lived in a pagan society where sexuality was treated completely differently? Sounds liberating? Maybe, until you remember that in many ancient societies, sex was tied to fertility rituals, sacred prostitution, and the systemic abuse of slaves and children. Christianity, with all its repressive excesses, at least attempted to create a sexual ethic based on consent, fidelity, and dignity. Without that, you go back to Rome, where the rape of slaves was legal, the marriage of 12-year-olds was normal, and nobody saw a problem. Is that what you want? Because if you remove the text that shaped Western consciousness on this, perhaps you won't have evolution, only regression. And if you see that this abyss has no bottom, share this video. Someone needs to see this.
But this is where the story gets really dark. Because up until now, we've talked about civilization, art, morality, politics. But what about the individual? What about you? Without the Bible, who would you be? Not philosophically, literally. Would you even exist? Think about your family tree. Now go back 10 generations, 20, 30. At some point, one of your ancestors made a life decision that was directly or indirectly influenced by the Bible. They chose not to kill an enemy because of love thy neighbor. They spared a stranger because of the Good Samaritan. They decided not to abandon a sick child because God doesn't make trash. These micro decisions, multiplied by billions of people over 2,000 years, created a chain of events that culminated in you. Change one of those decisions, and the chain breaks. Your parents never meet. Your grandparents are never born. You simply don't happen. Another person is born in your place, with a different face, a different name, a different consciousness. You, specifically you, cease to exist in this alternate reality. Is it disturbing? Yes, but it's true. History isn't abstract, it's personal. Every great historical event is the sum of countless small human choices, and many of those choices were shaped by a book you may never have read, but which created you nonetheless, like a literary ghost that writes your existence without your knowledge. Now imagine the modern world without that ghost, without Christian guilt, without the notion of sin and redemption, without the idea that you can err and be forgiven, fall and get back up. In cultures where honor is everything, where shame is permanent, how many people choose death over dishonor? How many suicides due to failures? How many families destroyed because someone tarnished their name? Feudal Japan had seppuku. Ancient Rome had suicide as an honorable way out, but Christianity, with its text about God who forgives the unforgivable, who loves the unworthy, created a culture where a new beginning is possible, where failure is not the end. Without this narrative, without this psychological structure, how many people simply give up at the first fall? And let's talk about something no one wants to admit: hope.
The Bible is fundamentally a book of hope, liberation from Egypt, return from exile, resurrection of the dead. There is always an after. There is always redemption. There is always light at the end of the tunnel, even if the tunnel lasts 400 years. Without this text hammering this message home to generations of readers, what remains? Fatalism? Cold stoicism? Passive acceptance of suffering as eternal? Because other philosophies have their answers to pain, but few have the same Judeo-Christian stubbornness that this too shall pass, something better is coming. Remove this irrational, almost stupid hope from the collective unconscious, and how many resistance movements never happen? How many people accept tyranny because it's always been this way? How many slaves never rebel because they cannot imagine freedom? And here's the final irony, the one that will fry your brain. We're talking about a world without the Bible, but using concepts that only exist because of it. Injustice, rights, dignity, freedom. These words carry weight because they have been imbued with theological meaning for millennia. In a world that never had this text, these words might not even exist, or they might exist but mean completely different things. Freedom in an eternal Rome might only mean not being a slave, not personal self-determination. Dignity might be tied to social status, not inherent humanity. The moral language you use to criticize the Bible was forged by the Bible. It's like trying to criticize grammar without using grammar. You're trapped inside the system you criticize, and you don't even realize it. And you know what's even scarier? We can't even properly imagine this alternate world because our brains have been programmed by 2,000 years of Judeo-Christian culture. We try to visualize a Europe without Christianity and immediately fill the void with Enlightenment, humanist, secular values. But these values only exist because they emerged from, or in reaction to, centuries of Christian thought. In a timeline where the Bible was never written, these values may never arise. They may not even make sense. You would try to explain universal human rights to a Roman, and he would look at you as if you were talking nonsense, because in his worldview, there is no universal human. There is citizen, slave, barbarian, rigid, immutable, obvious categories. If you're still alive after this mental bombshell, share it, because this needs to go viral.
So let's move on to the final test. We're going to put you in this alternate world for a day. You wake up one morning in 2026, but in a 2026 where the Bible never existed. What would it be like? First, you probably don't wake up on a Sunday, because Sunday is the Lord's Day, a concept that comes directly from the biblical text. Maybe you work 7 days a week, or maybe the week doesn't even have 7 days, because that cycle comes from creation in Genesis. Calendar? Completely different. There is no before Christ and after Christ. Maybe you count the years from the founding of Rome, or from the first Mongol emperor, or maybe there isn't even a universal calendar. Each region has its own, and coordinating international events is a logistical nightmare. You turn on the TV. There's no news about Christmas or Easter, obviously, but there's also no concept of weekend. There's no Red Cross, which was founded by Christians and has a cross in its name. There are no hospitals as you know them, because the idea of caring for poor patients for free comes from Christian religious orders. There are doctors, of course, but only for those who can pay. The rest, they die at home or in the street. And nobody cares much, because compassion for the weak isn't exactly a dominant cultural value in this world. You go to work, your boss is abusive, treats you like an object, and there's no concept of worker dignity to protect you. There's no union movement inspired by Christian values of fraternity. There are no labor laws based on notions of social justice that came from Christian thinkers. You endure it or you're replaced. Simple as that. Total corporate Darwinism without any ethical counterweight. You go back home. You turn on your computer. The internet exists, but it's radically different. There are no Jesus loves you memes. There are no debates about religion. But there's also no UNESCO, which was created to preserve cultural heritage inspired by universalist Christian values. There's no universal declaration of human rights, written by people who believed in inherent dignity stemming from divine creation. What does it have?
Probably a more tribal, more fragmented world, where each culture makes its own rules and there's no global moral authority to question genocides or atrocities. As long as it happens far away, nobody cares. You open a book, but what books are there? There's no Dostoevsky exploring guilt and redemption. There's no Tolkien creating fantasy based on Christian themes of sacrifice and catastrophe. There's no C.S. Lewis, no Milton, no Dante. Literature is functional or epic or philosophical, but it lacks the psychological depth that comes from centuries of Christian self-analysis about sin, grace, and free will. The stories are shallower, or perhaps they aren't even shallow, just different in ways you can't even process, because your brain has been trained to recognize narrative arcs of fall and redemption that simply don't exist in this reality. You try to sleep, but you look at the ceiling and think, what happens after death? In this world, no one has a comforting answer. Maybe it's nothingness. Maybe it's endless reincarnation with no escape. Maybe it's the Greek Hades, where everyone is a bored shadow forever. There is no heaven. There is no hope of reuniting with those you love. There is no final justice for those who suffered injustice here. You die, and that's it. The end. How does this change the way you live? Do you take more risks because you only have one life and it ends in nothing? Or do you take fewer risks because there's nothing afterward, so you have to preserve this life as much as possible? Nobody knows, but it's different, profoundly different. And then you realize this world isn't necessarily worse, it's just unrecognizable. You can't even judge it if it's better or worse, because the criteria you would use to judge it were shaped by the world you know. You're a prisoner of your own reality, trying to imagine another, but always filtering through the lenses that this reality gave you. So, here's the truth no one wants to admit. The Bible isn't just a religious book. It never was. It's the source code of Western civilization. It's the operating system that runs behind everything you consider normal, obvious, natural. Justice, rights, dignity, progress, hope. All of that was programmed by this text over millennia, and you don't even realize it because you were born inside the matrix. Remove this book from history, and you won't return to a natural state of humankind. You'll go somewhere else, perhaps better, perhaps worse, probably just different in ways your current brain can't process, because you are a product of this text as much as any Gothic cathedral or Renaissance painting. You think with biblical categories without even knowing they're biblical. And you know what's most ironic? You can hate the Bible. You can reject it. You can symbolically burn it and declare it oppressive, outdated, dangerous. You have that right, but you have that right because you live in a society shaped by it. The freedom to question sacred texts? It's a historical luxury created by centuries of Christian theological debate. You have freedom to reject the Bible because the Bible built the world where that rejection is possible. And that doesn't mean you have to believe in it. It doesn't mean it's true in a religious sense. It just means it's powerful, undeniably, terrifyingly powerful. A text that has changed the world more than any army, more than any empire, more than any technology. For 2,000 years, this book has rewritten humanity, and without it, we would be another species, literally another species, not biologically, but culturally, psychologically, morally. So, the next time you look at a dusty Bible on a shelf, remember, you are looking at the most influential object ever produced by human hands, more important than the wheel, more transformative than fire, because the wheel takes you far, but the Bible tells you where to go. Fire warms you, but the Bible tells you what to do with the heat. This book didn't just record history, it created it. It created you. And now that you know this, now that you've seen your own matrix, what do you do with this information? Because ignorance is no longer an option. You've just seen your own matrix, and there's no red pill that will bring you back. Comment below, did this video change anything about you? Did it make you see the Bible differently, even if you don't believe in it? I want to know. And if you're not already subscribed, subscribe now, because the next story will blow you away in a completely different way. What if one decision had destroyed eternity? The story of an angel who had 5 seconds to choose between obeying and questioning, and chose to question. What happened after that wasn't a fall, it was an explosion that would crack reality in two. See you there.